The clash no one expected lit up late-night television. Robert De Niro walked onto Jimmy Kimmel Live to polite applause, but by the end of the night, Jimmy wasn't smiling. His trademark sarcasm had failed him. His quick jabs, the ones he usually used to keep guests off balance, collapsed under the weight of De Niro's calm but ruthless comebacks. On his own stage, in front of his own audience, Jimmy Kimmel was stripped of his swagger. Robert De Niro didn't just win the exchange. He dismantled Jimmy piece by piece until the host looked rattled, awkward, and exposed in the very seat where he had built his reputation, humiliating others. What began as playful banter spiraled into humiliation. Kimmel tried to poke fun at De Niro's age, his seriousness, his reputation as Hollywood's tough guy. But De Niro wasn't playing along. He gave short, sharp replies at first, then gradually turned the tables. Each jab Kimmel threw came back harder, sharper, funnier, and the crowd loved it. And then came the line. A single devastating remark from De Niro that cut through the noise and left Jimmy staring at his desk, his grin collapsing into a grimace. The cameras caught everything. The clip went viral within hours, shared millions of times across TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. Headlines didn't mince words. De Niro destroys Kimmel on his own show. Kimmel humiliated by Hollywood legend. Robert De Niro leaves late-night host speechless. For Jimmy Kimmel, it was one of the most embarrassing nights of his career. For Robert De Niro, it was another role to add to his legacy, not in film, but in real life, live on stage, showing that even late night's sharpest host could be humbled. The night began like any other. The studio was packed, the band played, and Jimmy Kimmel walked on stage, smiling and waving as the applause filled the room. He delivered his monologue with the usual rhythm, tossing jokes at the news, poking fun at celebrities, smirking at his own punchlines. It was the formula that had worked for years. But backstage, Robert De Niro was waiting. The legendary actor wasn't there to charm or play into Jimmy's antics. He was there because the booking had been locked in weeks earlier, and now it was his turn in the chair. De Niro is famously unpredictable in interviews, sometimes silent, sometimes playful, but always impossible to control. Jimmy knew it, and he thought he was ready. He wasn't. "Please welcome Robert De Niro," Jimmy announced, grinning, his voice carrying that mix of respect and sarcasm he always used with powerful guests. The audience clapped loudly as De Niro walked out slowly, hands in his pockets, his face stern but steady. He wasn't smiling. He didn't need to. His presence alone commanded attention. Jimmy reached out for a handshake, which De Niro accepted with a brief nod. Then the two sat across from each other. Cameras zoomed in, the lights hit perfectly, and the interview began. From the start, Jimmy tried to steer the mood. He cracked a joke about De Niro's age, smirking as he asked, "So do you ever forget what movie you're in when you've been in so many?" The crowd laughed, but De Niro didn't. He stared at Jimmy for a long second, expression flat, before answering. "No," he said plainly. "But I guess that happens when the jokes get old." The crowd chuckled, a ripple at first, then louder. Jimmy's smirk twitched. He tried to recover, tossing another line. "Well, you've got a reputation for being the tough guy. Does that mean you scare directors too?" De Niro leaned back in his chair, arms crossed casually, his eyes locked on Jimmy. "No," he said again, calmly, "but maybe I should. It seems to work for some hosts." The audience erupted louder this time. Jimmy forced a laugh, slapping his desk as if in on the joke, but his eyes betrayed him. They darted away just for a second, and in that second everyone watching saw it. The balance had shifted. Robert De Niro wasn't just answering questions. He was testing Jimmy, parrying each jab with one of his own, hitting harder with fewer words. The silence between his replies was as cutting as the lines themselves. Jimmy pressed forward, trying to reassert control. "You know, you're known for playing serious roles, but people say in real life you're a lot softer. Is that true, or should I be scared right now?" He smiled wide, leaning forward, waiting for the laugh. De Niro didn't give him one. He leaned forward too, his face expressionless, his voice low and steady. "Why, you nervous?" The audience roared with laughter. Jimmy chuckled awkwardly, rubbing his chin, shifting in his chair. The exchange had just begun, but already the roles had flipped. Jimmy Kimmel, usually the one in control, was now the one scrambling. Robert De Niro was calm, sharp, and unmovable, and this was just the setup. The destruction was still to come. Jimmy Kimmel leaned forward, trying to regain his footing. His laugh was a little louder than necessary. His smile stretched a little wider, the signs of a man determined to wrestle back control of his stage. He had been here before, with sharp guests, with people who didn't want to play the game. And he usually won. But Robert De Niro wasn't just any guest. "So, Bob," Jimmy said, forcing familiarity into his tone, "I heard you're not a big fan of interviews. Is this painful for you right now?" He grinned, glancing at the crowd as if inviting them in on the joke. De Niro didn't blink. He sat still for a moment, letting the question hang in the air, making Jimmy sweat just long enough. Then he answered flatly, his voice low and even. "No, not painful." "But I can see why it might be for you." The audience burst into laughter, the sound washing over Jimmy as his smile faltered just slightly. He tapped his pen against the desk, trying to keep the rhythm of the show moving, but De Niro's line had already landed. It wasn't just a joke, and it was a reversal. For the first time in the segment, Jimmy wasn't the one making people laugh. He was the target. Kimmel forced a chuckle, nodding as though he had expected it, but his eyes betrayed him again. They darted away, then back, narrowing just enough to show the sting. He leaned on his fallback. Humor at the guest's expense. Okay. "You're quick tonight," Jimmy said, wagging a finger playfully. "But you've got this reputation for being, let's just say, a little grumpy. People say talking to you is like pulling teeth." The crowd chuckled lightly, but De Niro leaned forward, his expression unchanged. He let the silence stretch just long enough to become uncomfortable before replying, "Funny," he said, his tone still calm. "That's how people describe watching your monologues." The room erupted. The laughter was sharper this time, louder, rolling over the stage as Jimmy's smirk collapsed into something more strained. He shifted in his chair, his hand brushing the papers on his desk, his laugh shorter, emptier. He tried again, this time aiming for a bigger swing. "I'm just trying to make this fun. But maybe you left all your humor back in the 70s? It was a jab at De Niro's age, his long career. But De Niro didn't flinch. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes locking on Jimmy with that piercing stare he'd perfected over decades of playing men who don't back down. "You've been trying to make this fun?" De Niro said, his voice steady, "for 20 years. Still waiting," the audience exploded. It wasn't just laughter. It was applause, the kind that shakes the walls. Jimmy raised his eyebrows, forcing another smile, but this time it looked more like a grimace. He glanced down at his desk, shuffled his notes, then looked back up with a laugh that sounded hollow. De Niro sat back, arms crossed, his face calm. He wasn't laughing, he wasn't smiling, he wasn't even trying. He didn't need to. Every word he dropped landed heavier than Jimmy's rehearsed jokes. The balance had shifted completely. Jimmy was on defense now, and everyone in the room could feel it. Jimmy knew he was losing ground. His usual rhythm, a quick jab, a smirk, a laugh line, wasn't working. De Niro wasn't giving him easy material. Instead, every attempt to poke fun was boomeranging back harder. Still, Jimmy pressed on. It was his stage, his show. He couldn't back down now. "So," Jimmy said, tapping his pen again, "you've been in hundreds of movies, some of the greatest of all time. But, let's be honest, not all of them were winners. Do you ever watch one of your movies and think, wow, that was terrible?" He grinned wide, leaning back like he'd scored a clever point. De Niro tilted his head, squinting slightly, then leaned forward, his elbows resting casually on his knees. "Yeah," he said slowly. "Sometimes I watch a bad one. Then I flip the channel and see your show. Makes me feel better." The crowd erupted again, laughter drowning out Jimmy's attempted comeback. He raised his hands, laughing too, but the laugh had no real weight. He was laughing because he had to, not because he wanted to. Still, he tried to pivot, tried to regain the upper hand. "You're killing me here," Jimmy said, grinning through the sting. "But you've got to admit, not everything you've done has been a masterpiece. Come on, even you have regrets." De Niro nodded slowly, his face thoughtful. "Sure, I regret this interview," the audience howled. The sound was deafening. Jimmy's face flushed slightly, the red creeping up from his neck as he forced another smile. His laugh was shorter now, almost sharp, a little too quick. He tapped his desk again, shifting in his chair as if looking for a way out of the hole he was digging, but De Niro wasn't done. He leaned back, crossing his arms again, his gaze steady on Jimmy. "You want to talk regrets? I've got one more. Accepting this invite." Another wave of laughter hit the studio. Jimmy's smirk collapsed into something closer to a wince. He rubbed his forehead briefly, then forced another laugh, but his eyes were glassy now, darting to the side cameras as if silently asking the producers how much longer this had to go. Desperate, Jimmy tried one more angle. Sarcasm. Wow, you're really giving me the business tonight. What, did you come here just to roast me? De Niro shrugged casually. No, but you make it too easy. The timing, the delivery, the unshakable calm. It was brutal. Jimmy leaned back, his mouth opening slightly as if to reply, but no words came. He swallowed, glanced at the band, then looked back at De Niro with a laugh that sounded more like surrender. The cameras caught everything. Jimmy's forced smiles, his restless movements, his awkward chuckles. And they caught De Niro, too, sitting calm, arms crossed, completely in control. The escalation wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was quiet, devastating, and unstoppable. By the time the segment neared its end, Jimmy Kimmel wasn't the confident host anymore. He was the guest, and Robert De Niro was running the show, and the real destruction was still to come. The tension had been building with every exchange. Jimmy Kimmel sat behind his desk, gripping his pen, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, his body shifting uncomfortably as the seconds dragged. Robert De Niro sat opposite him, arms folded, calm and immovable, answering every jab with a sharper counter. The audience could feel it. The viewers at home could feel it. This wasn't Kimmel's interview anymore. It was De Niro's. Jimmy tried to rally. He had to. His show's rhythm depended on control, and right now it was slipping through his fingers. He leaned forward, tapping his desk for emphasis, and said with a forced grin, "Come on, Bob, lighten up a little. You're on a comedy show. People tune in to laugh." De Niro raised an eyebrow, tilting his head slightly. His voice was low, deliberate, and steady. "They're laughing," he said. "Just not at your jokes," the audience howled. Jimmy's face flushed, the color creeping up his neck. He forced another laugh, tapping his pen against the desk again, but the noise sounded hollow, desperate. His eyes darted away, then back to De Niro, and for a moment the camera caught it, the look of a host realizing he had lost his stage. Jimmy tried to pivot. "All right, tough guy," he said, his grin tight. "If you think you can do this better than me, maybe you should take my job." De Niro leaned forward, his gaze unflinching, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Why would I take your job, Jimmy?" He paused for a long beat, letting the silence settle, then delivered the line that silenced the room. "I actually have talent." The eruption of laughter and applause shook the studio. Some audience members stood, clapping wildly, unable to contain themselves. Jimmy sat frozen for a split second, his mouth open, his laugh delayed, awkward, forced. His trademark smirk collapsed into something closer to a grimace. The cameras caught it all, the shift in his posture, the flush in his cheeks, the way he gripped his pen like a lifeline. De Niro leaned back in his chair, arms crossed again, calm as ever, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Jimmy Kimmel had been destroyed on his own stage, with one devastating line that would echo across the internet for days. Jimmy tried to push forward, but his rhythm was gone. He fumbled through his next question, his voice a little too high, his laugh a little too sharp. De Niro answered with short, clipped remarks, each one carrying more weight than Jimmy's attempts to steer the conversation back on track. "So, your new movie," Jimmy began, but De Niro cut him off. "Yeah, people will actually remember it," the crowd roared again. Jimmy raised his eyebrows, chuckled, slapped his desk, but the pain in his eyes was visible. He looked down at his notes more often now, clinging to his cue cards like they were a lifeline. Every time he tried to regain control, De Niro slipped it from his grasp with a single line. The segment dragged, but the power dynamic never shifted back. By the time the band played the outro, Jimmy was smiling through clenched teeth, his jokes landing flat, his confidence shaken. De Niro walked off calmly, hands in his pockets, leaving behind a host visibly rattled on his own show. Backstage, staffers exchanged glances. They had seen awkward interviews before, but nothing like this. De Niro hadn't yelled, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't even seemed angry. He had dismantled Jimmy Kimmel with calm precision, using the host's own stage as the platform for his humiliation, and outside the studio, the world was already watching. The clip of De Niro's killer line hit Twitter within minutes. "Why would I take your job, Jimmy? I actually have talent. It spread like wildfire, reposted by fans, comedians, even other celebrities. TikTok edits set the moment to dramatic music, looping Jimmy's stunned expression again and again. Instagram Reels captured the silence that followed, the awkward grimace that betrayed his defeat. By morning, the headlines were merciless. Robert De Niro eviscerates. Jimmy Kimmel Live. Kimmel's worst night. De Niro leaves. Host speechless. Hollywood legend humiliates late-night host on his own stage. The fallout wasn't just online. Critics weighed in, noting how rare it was to see Jimmy Kimmel so thoroughly outmatched. Columnists praised De Niro's poise, his refusal to play along with cheap jokes, and his ability to turn the tables without breaking a sweat. De Niro didn't need a script, one article wrote. He just needed the truth. For Jimmy, the night became a blemish on his career. His brand was built on quick wit and dominance over his guests. But in one interview, Robert De Niro had flipped the script entirely, making Jimmy the butt of the joke on his own show. Weeks passed, but the clip refused to fade. Every time Jimmy Kimmel's name trended, the video resurfaced. It was replayed during comedy monologues, dissected on podcasts, and shared endlessly across social media. The phrase itself, "I actually have talent," became a meme, used far beyond late-night television. De Niro's calm delivery turned it into legend. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It was devastating because it was true, or at least it felt true to the millions who shared it. It cut through Jimmy's persona and exposed something raw, a host who relied on sarcasm and control, stripped of both in front of his audience. For Robert De Niro, the moment added another layer to his already towering reputation. He wasn't just the legendary actor of Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, or The Godfather Part 2. He was the man who walked onto a late-night stage and humbled its host without breaking a sweat. Fans hailed him as unshakable, untouchable, a reminder that some reputations can't be dented by cheap jokes. For Jimmy Kimmel, the legacy was harder. He laughed it off in later episodes, even joked about it in passing, but the internet never let it go. Anytime he sparred with another guest, commenters dragged out the De Niro clip, reminding everyone of the night he lost control. It became part of his story, whether he liked it or not. The image of that night still circulates. Jimmy Kimmel, smiling weakly, gripping his pen, his eyes betraying the sting while Robert De Niro sits back. Arms folded, calm and collected, the embodiment of authority. It's not just a clip. It's a cultural memory, a moment when the host was humbled and the guest walked away victorious. And that's the legacy of Robert De Niro on Jimmy Kimmel Live. Not an interview, not a conversation, but a public dismantling. A reminder that even on late-night television, where hosts usually control every second, there are moments when the guest takes over. And when they do, the world never forgets.